Hi, I'm Lou and this is Lily Rowe. Today's video has been inspired by a question from one of our viewers. So a big thank you to Jasmin, who asked the question, how do we convince parents or other educators that sanctions and rewards might not be the best thing for children, and that's perhaps why we don't use them at Forest School. And I mean, that's a really good question. And from my experience, it's one of the most tricky parts of Forest School and perhaps one of the most challenging things for people to get their head round. And I guess, you know, if we're living in a rewards-based society where people have been actively told to use sanctions and rewards in order to parent and in order to educate, then, you know, there's a, you know, it's probably a realistic thing that people do question us for not using that strategy, I suppose. So I'm going to just share in this video 4 tips that I've found useful when trying to explain to people why we don't use sanctions and rewards at Forest School. So the 4 things that we're going to cover in this video is, the first one is to explain to people a bit more about the Forest School philosophy, in particular the parts about self-esteem and play. The second one is to explain to people that just because we don't use sanctions and rewards doesn't mean that there isn't real life consequences to how people choose to act and speak and think. The third one is to provide alternatives, alternative ways of speaking, other strategies. And the fourth one is to help people notice the effects of how the children are when you're not using sanctions and rewards. So let's get into these. So firstly, explain to people a little bit more, I guess, around the why. Why are we not using sanctions and rewards, and linking this to the philosophy of Forest School? As I see it, there are 2 main parts to Forest School philosophy where this is particularly prevalent, particularly important. And the first is self-esteem theory. So we use the Carl Rogers kind of approach to looking at self-worth and understanding self-worth. And part of Carl Rogers' theory is the importance of unconditional positive regard. Now, if something is unconditional, that means it's unconditional, you know, positive regard or love or care, whatever you want to call it, is always there regardless of how that individual acts and speaks and behaves. Sanctions and rewards are conditional strategies. So, you know, if you don't behave in the way that I want you to, I'm going to put you on the naughty step as a sanction, and I'm going to withdraw my attention from you. That's conditional, not unconditional. And so unconditional positive regard, according to Carl Rogers, is completely crucial to develop that significant relationship with individuals. People need to know that you're going to always be there for them no matter what. It's particularly important in my experience of working with more vulnerable learners as well, because they're so used to people abandoning them and leaving them, that the unconditional elements is really important. And I guess you can still perhaps not agree with what people say and do, but it doesn't mean that you're going to withdraw your attention and affection and positive regard for them. So that's certainly one area of Forest School philosophy, because we're there trying to build self-worth and self-esteem, that we need to be unconditional in order to be able to do that. So that's one element of theory. The other element of Forest School theory that I would suggest sharing with people is around play. And so play by definition has to be have these 3 elements to it, which is, I'm sure you all know if you're forest school leaders, which is freely chosen, personally directed and intrinsically motivated. And I want to just focus on that last one, intrinsically motivated, meaning the drive. Bubba's giving me back my buff. So I was talking about intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation being that the drive to play comes from within. It's an internal process. We do that thing, whatever it is that we're playing, we do it for our own personal sense of satisfaction, our own pleasure, our own enjoyment. We do it for our own reasons. Other people might not understand why we're doing it. Other people might not value it, but we do, because there's something internal within us doing it. Sanctions and rewards are an external manipulation tool that could destroy play. Because if you try to reward someone to play, then it no longer will be intrinsically motivated. It will be externally rewarded. So, so that's another element I would definitely consider sharing with people when you're trying to communicate that. If you're using sanctions and rewards to control playtime and to persuade people to play, then let's not play, fundamentally. And forest school is about getting high quality play in nature. So the second tip I'd like to share with you is to explain to people that just because we don't use sanctions and rewards doesn't mean that there aren't consequences. And I found that this point is particularly important when speaking to people who perhaps have a strong desire or need for justice. In my opinion, operating the way we do at Forest School, the consequences are actually felt far deeper than sanctions and rewards. Sanctions and rewards are a really shallow way of working with people's behaviour. Because if you think about a sanction, say there's been a fight, right, and another child has hit another child, or maybe not even that severe, maybe they've built a shelter and someone's pulled it down and trashed it and the other child's very upset. Okay, so many adults in that situation would of course want there to be some sort of consequence, some sort of justice brought up in terms of that kind of issue. I guess that desire is there to try and help the individual who perhaps is the perpetrator to understand how they affect the world around them and how they affect other people. So it's probably coming from a place of wanting to be helpful to that child. But the thing is, in the sanctions and rewards-based system, we'll give them a sanction that is usually completely unrelated to what they've done. As in, if they've hit another child, we don't use corporal punishment anymore in the UK. So it's not the natural consequence of things. If they've trashed somebody's shelter, they're not usually experiencing how it has affected the other child. They normally get, told that, I don't know, they have to go and sit on a naughty step, or they get excluded, or they have to go to the head teacher's office, or something that's unrelated to what their behaviour has actually done. So at Forest School, I would suggest that we're more focused on the natural consequences of things. And perhaps we might use strategies like restorative justice kind of techniques to try and help people understand how their actions affect other people. So, for example, if there was, the child that was very upset from their shelter being locked down, perhaps we'd get a conversation, maybe not right at the time if there are emotions heated, but at some point sit down, have a facilitated conversation, and getting the victim, if you like, to talk about how how it felt and how that has affected them, so that the perpetrator has to hear that. They have to hear what they've done and how it's affected another person or other people, which in my mind is a much deeper a deeper consequence fundamentally than the shallowness of, well, you get excluded or you get sent out to the head teacher, because you have to sit there and you have to hear it, and then often once you've had those sorts of conversations, you could ask the children involved, well, how do you think, what's the way forward, how are we going to solve this, and it's not presented as a punishment, it's presented as a resolution, and a way forward, which in my mind is a much more constructive way of working with behaviour, and also gives the individual the tools to help remedy situations in the future, and potentially even help them with like coping mechanisms and things as well. So we're looking at things in a much deeper way, which could have a much bigger transformative, thank you, Baba, a much transformative effect on people's behaviour in the long term, which Sanctions and Rewards doesn't. It deals with things in the here and now in a shallow way, whereas at Forest School we're on for the long game. We want to get under the behaviour, to the emotions and the needs-based stuff, so that we can help people, well, further on into their lives through building that emotional skills and those behavioural skills. The third tip we'd like to share is to offer alternative strategies to people, because sometimes when we've had these conversations with people, it's like their mind has been blown, and like they literally then don't know how to talk to children, because we live in such a rewards-based society. Like everything is often judgmental language, good, bad, naughty, kind, the words we use on a day-to-day basis are infused with judgment. And so offering alternative methods is really important, because otherwise people don't know how to speak to children. So that might be something as simple as explaining, just say what you notice, and giving some good sentence starters. Thank you. Like, I notice you're feeding me, Baba, thank you. Gratitude is also another strategy. So if you can show appreciation and gratitude for someone rather than praising them, for example, then there's also, thank you. Then there are also more formal dialogue types. Thanks. Like non-violent communication, which again, if you're working with more challenging behaviour, I really recommend looking into non-violent communication, because that works really well. But it's, at its core, it is again observing without judgment, the behaviour initially, and then it's also asking us to tune into ourselves and recognise what emotions and needs are happening within us, and then it's about making requests. So there's a 4-step process: a concrete observation, identify how it makes you feel, identify thank you, what need that's coming from, and then make a request, which I think I explain a little bit more about these strategies and some other ideas in my other video, where I'm talking about why we don't praise at Forest School, so I'll pop the link in the description below. One thing I would say about this as well, about providing alternative strategies, is recognising that it's hard, and not to beat ourselves up about it if we do accidentally praise a child or, you know, use judgmental language, because it's so ingrained culturally in us that is a really, really tricky thing to not do. And I suppose if you're talking to parents and other educators or your helpers, recognise that it's a difficult thing and that we need to be non-judgmental on ourselves as well. And, you know, not to panic if things don't go according to plan. You know, old habits die hard, as it were. But just bringing our awareness to it is the first step to making any sorts of changes. So the final tip that we'd like to share is to help those other adults notice the effects of not using sanctions and rewards on the children. So I guess it's sharing with them how Forest School you know, is affecting their children. And probably the best way of doing that, thank you, Baba. The best way of doing that is to invite them to come and observe a session, to come and see the children in action, and to see how it's actually working. Again, I think a lot of people are concerned that if you don't use sanctions and rewards, then the children must be basically running riot. It must be like Lord of the Flies or something, you know, with no consequences and, you know, everyone for themselves kind of thing. And so I think if we can invite them to observe a session and they can see the reality of it and can see, you know, just what the children are capable of in terms of like their emotional intelligence, their emotional maturity, their resilience, you know, their ability to resolve conflict, solve problems, negotiate with each other. I think a lot of the time in our culture we underestimate what even very young, you know, what young children can do, or even older children for that matter. And you know, Forest School is fundamentally about respecting children and respecting what their innate capabilities are and supporting those. So bringing people into a session to observe their child or the children in their class can be a really powerful thing. I'd suggest, if you are doing that as well, to make sure you've got enough ratios to free you up a little bit so that you can be there to help them observe, because some people might not know what they're looking at, if you know what I mean. They might not understand the story behind things. So if you're a bit freer, you're able to communicate some of what is going on. And you can draw their attention onto what is being observing, like, you know, Jacob and Sophie had an argument last session about their shelter. I'm noticing that they're helping gather more sticks for it this session. You can give a little bit more of the history and the background that perhaps wouldn't be seen otherwise. So that can be really powerful. I'd say if you can't get the actual other adults to come and visit your session, then collecting observations, particularly significant ones about kind of emotional development, and sharing those with the other educators, with the parents, you know, nice anecdotal case studies of perhaps a particular child's journey, that can be very, very powerful. And maybe share that if you can't actually get them into the Forest School to see it themselves. I guess also you can video some stuff as well. You could make like little videos, little case study videos potentially might be quite a nice thing to have that could be shared you know, on a website or something about a particular individual's journey, obviously with consent. There's going to be a bonus tip, number 5, because I've just thought of something whilst we're recording, and that is Alfie Kohn says in his book, Punished by Rewards, that sanctions and rewards actually move people's attention and focus away from learning and they become more focused on what the reward is that they're going to get. So there is an argument, I guess, particularly for talking to other educators, that sanctions and rewards detracts from people's learning and certainly their own sort of intrinsic motivation to learn, which I think is quite a powerful argument, and one that often upsets teachers quite a lot, because schools are basically running on sanctions and reward systems most of the time. So yeah, look up Alfie Kohn. He's written a few books which are quite mind-blowing, and some very persuasive arguments in there. Punished by Rewards is a good one for educators, or if you're looking at parents as an audience, he's got a book, Unconditional Parenting, as well. I'll pop the links in the description below. So those are our 4 tips for explaining to people why we don't use sanctions and rewards. Do you have others? Do let us know in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you. A big thank you to Jasmin again for asking this question. It's such an important one, and I'm sure it's a barrier that many forest school leaders come across. I know I have, so it's great to start that conversation. If you've enjoyed this video, do give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel so you can join us again in the woods next time. Bye-bye. And thanks for watching. You say bye-bye to the camera. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Mama.
Unconditional positive regard is deeper than sanctions and rewards facades. Use non-judgmental strategies for emotional growth when you head to the trees.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Mama.